Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Leaders Show. We're live every other Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing what happens when big tech companies fold, plus other headlines for digital leaders. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI, the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher, author, and coach, previously senior research fellow and professor at Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. He's held leadership roles at World 50 Labs, EY, and Accenture. Carlos, it's been a few weeks. I almost forgot how to introduce you.
Yeah, I saw that. Good to be back. So you remember who I am now.
I remember who you are. Your background is different. You look more intellectual than last time I saw you.
Even smarter than before, right? That's good. It's headed in the right direction, the curve.
How have you been, my friend? Oh, good. You just got back some travels?
That's right. Left the country for a couple of weeks to go to England and came back to catch up on all the news, VP picks, market meltdown, unmeltdown today. So as always, lots going on. We left just after the meltdown, right? The Microsoft CrowdStrike, whatever it was that happened. So but no issue on the trip, and good to be back then.
So you left. I see. So you crashed the world, and then you left the country.
Right.
It sounds guilty to me.
I uploaded something.
You weren't affected by all the travel issues?
No, I think it was over like a week before, right? So,
okay.
It wasn't anything I uploaded onto Delta.com, unfortunately.
Craziness. Well, we're going to talk about the tech industry in particular. What happens when these companies fold and fail and all this stuff. The big news today was that this U.S. judge ruling Google is an illegal monopoly. Did you see that?
It is, and it's interesting. I was reading before the show. The thing that struck out of me from the article was it's okay to be dominant. It's not okay to abuse the dominant position. It seemed to be Judge Mehta's sort of essential logic, right? It wasn't, and a lot of it came down in the analysis to the case that Google made that said, listen, we're number one because we're really good and our technology is the best. But then the judge said, well, then why are you paying so much, right, to be the dominant search platform? If you really were the best, you would be picked automatically. The fact that you have to pay to be the default says that you may not be as good as you think you are, and there are other things that are keeping you in that position. And that seemed to be the compelling argument at the end of the day. And it was interesting testimony by it was a neuroscientist who was explaining people will not change default settings, even if it's very easy to do so. It just becomes something that we do. But the judge also felt that there was abuse going on. It seems to come down to that, right? And it's an important case, as the analyst was saying, because it's the first really big antitrust ruling, probably since the Microsoft case way back in the day. And so now to see what happens will be interesting. And we've talked about it so much in the show, right? At what point does having the scale of a Google hinder other people, right, from innovating? And it seems, at least in this case, that the sense was, well, now, right?
Well, that's what the assistant attorney general said, that this really paves the path for innovation. But you're right. I mean, they've got like 90% market share in both search and kind of general search, text, and we kind of forget this stuff, right? I mean, certainly. I think my generation, you grew up with, a bunch of different search engines, and then all of a sudden Google was dominant. But it's been 26 years.
3 decades.
That's a long time of Google dominance. And by the way, not that this should necessarily matter, but it's responsible for $175 billion in revenue annually for Google. So it's to your point, he cited kind of, not just being, the biggest, but claiming that they're using anti-competitive deals to keep rivals from gaining traction, and now they're 0 for 2 at antitrust trials, plus what's going on in Europe. So I think you're going to see some change happen.
What's interesting right now is 26 years, and if you go back and look at Google circa whatever it was, turn of the century, wasn't that different functionally than what you have today, right? So, and you see that really, and we kind of get used to that, but it really stands out to me when you see ChatGPT at work. And when I see people interact with the ChatGPT app, and there's the kinds of questions that people ask, right, as if they were asking a person. You go, well, in 26 years, should this have been around 10 years ago, right? 5 years ago from Google? Why didn't it, right? And because it's such a different thing. There was somebody I overheard asking a question, and it was something like, what were the top 3 colors, right, used by this designer about 3 years ago in a show in Milan, and I think it was Gucci, right? That's the kind of question. And then here was the answer. You can't ask Google that question, right? So there's such a leap in the interface that you go, well, did Google in a way kind of hurt itself, which we've seen in the cases, right, where you become so dominant that you become more obsessed with protecting what you have than gaining something new. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon. It in some ways, maybe the ruling is good for Google as much as they fought it. Had they not been so dominant, would they have come up with ChatGPT 10 years ago?
Right. That's the innovation question again, right? So interesting. And Zoom is really going after the docs business. Starting Monday, Zoom users will have the option to open a document tool from within their video calling app, create shareable files, and use Gen AI to help them write and edit them. So, essentially Zoom's version of Google Docs launching next week.
Well, Zoom is interesting because Zoom, I use it almost on a daily basis. It seems to be trying to find something else to do besides Zoom, right? It seems almost on a month that there's some new thing that it wants me to do or function or a calendar or connect my contract. I don't want to do any of that, right? You're Zoom, just Zoom, like be good at there. You still haven't gotten even that perfect because there's still things you could do better. And for 2 weeks, like the link thing disappeared and then they came back with the update. So I don't know, just be really good at being Zoom. I don't quite get like all these other things that are happening. I guess maybe other people use it. I don't know.
Because it's a bundling thing, right? I can't tell you how many, because I think that Zoom is the best pure play video platform, but I cannot tell you how many people I speak to on a daily basis that are using Teams tell me they hate it, but still are using Teams, right? Because from a corporate enterprise standpoint, it's, enterprise IT departments dictating these things, I think.
Well, and again, it goes back to you're right. I agree with you. I think it is. It's so good that even though I get Teams, right, or Meet, whatever, for free, or Teams with Office, I still pay in a pretty good chunk of money to Zoom because that's how good it is. And I just wish they would perfect what they're really good at, which they haven't, right? I always talk about something as basic as a timer, right? Or there are other things they could do that would be a lot more useful in the core product instead of asking me to upload all my contacts or calendar syncers. Like, I don't need you to schedule these.
Yeah. The world's got enough kind of business operating systems.
Right. The product you have really good. And it goes back to that. There was an old term, core competency, way back in the 90s, right? That idea of what are you really good at? And do you stick to that or do you try to evolve? And I think in this case, Google keeps trying to find other things to do, I suppose. Maybe they have to, I don't know. But my take is why not just stick to what you are already really good at and make it even better, which there's still more to do, right, with the core product. If the core product were perfect right now, it was just like the most amazing thing and it would blow everything out of the water, you say, okay, if you're bored, I guess you do other things. But they haven't nailed that yet. So don't worry about
all right. If you work at Zoom and you're bored, call Carlos. He's got something for you.
What to do on the core product. Thank you.
Last headline I wanted to, because we've talked extensively about this, and actually in a couple different ways before we jump into our main topic, is AI at the Olympics. So this controversial new surveillance system in Paris is kind of foreshadowing, a future where there's just too many CCTV cameras, surveillance cameras, for humans to physically watch, and security is always paramount at the Olympics. And this may be the first Olympics or maybe the second Olympics where, AI and IT security may have been more, even bigger invested in than physical security. So pretty interesting. So, they basically said there's too much video surveillance to actually physically watch, especially in transportation hubs and things. And there's a law, I don't know if it's an EU law or a French specific law, but last year they passed a law basically saying that algorithms are allowed to search video footage in real time for certain events that they've identified, like crowd surges, abandoned objects, weapons, people falling down, and things like that. So, obviously the privacy people are up in arms about it, but I don't know, knock wood, so far so good, I think, security wise, at least.
Well, I think it goes up in studying the Chinese surveillance system for a long time, right? And it's so far ahead of everybody else where you go on the highway, there are cameras pretty much every 5 minutes, your car is being photographed, right? You're being photographed, you're being scanned everywhere you go. And that's a really extreme example, but we are starting to live in a surveillance age. That was the case before AI. And I think it's even more so now in what we used to see in the movies, right? Where you walk into a thing and cameras see you or people, pick you out in a crowd. That's here. What it means for privacy is another issue, but I think that we're definitely in an age where if you're in a public space, you're being watched, right? And especially because I was in England and in London, this is the case, right? I think it's the most cameraed place on earth outside of China. And so you're cognizant that every time you look up, there's a camera, a feed that's watching wherever you're going. So for security reasons, but still, wherever you are, someone's watching what you're doing. I guess if you grew up with this stuff, that's one of the interesting things for me, right? It's the sense that if you grew up in this environment, you think it's normal.
Yeah.
That you're always going to be watched wherever you go, right?
Yeah, for me, I was actually with some members last week and having this discussion, pros and cons discussion, and for me, I really kind of separated into two different discussions, because to me, there's the surveillance and cameras piece of it, which already exists largely. I kind of feel that that's that's one of those that ship has sailed things where I've had this conversation with even family members where they're like, well, I'm not going to get a Ring camera because it's an invasion of my privacy. And I'm like, that's nice, but that neighbor has it, and that neighbor has it, and that neighbor has it, and that neighbor has it. So you're still on camera when you walk onto your front steps. That to me is a different issue than whether we should use AI. There's some really interesting, uses. If you're going to have all these cameras and it being you're being watched, they're already there. The AI can layer onto that existing infrastructure and do things that humans can't do. And as far as the biases go, there's biases with humans looking at this stuff too, right? So, maybe if we get it right as an industry, we can eliminate those biases that you can't as easily or quickly eliminate in people, and eliminate them in the algorithms, and then just do much more with it at scale.
Yeah, of course, but we've talked about on the show before this idea of the digital version of ourselves, right, Dan?
Yeah. Digital twins, yeah.
Right, that we have a physical presence, right, but then we have this digital presence, which is made up of what we do online, credit history, all these kinds of things. And so as I've argued before, your physical version can do very few things in modern society, right? It is only the digital version of you who can do most things, right? Your digital version can lease a car. The physical version cannot, right? First one can pay for one, maybe in cash, right? But it can't use credit. And so as these systems, I think, get more and more sophisticated, then it's incumbent upon us to understand, like, what does the digital version of me look like? And I think that's where there's a real gap for innovation, right? And in a space where if you said, I'd like to see my digital version, I can't do that today, right, Dan?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The closest you have is if you're doing credit monitoring, you get an email saying that somebody just ran your credit, right? But that's about it.
It's like this tiny slice, but I think it'd be interesting if you said, hey, well, listen, there's a website you can go, put in your name, authenticate, and it creates a composite. It says, this is what you look like to the bureaus. This is what you look like to police. This is what you look like to your school. This is what you look like to your employer, right? And you could put all that together and get a sense of, this is what I look like online. Oh, and by the way, to your point, right? This is you walking through Bath or you walking through London last week. Here's what you were picked up at this point at this time. And because we're moving quickly to a point where the cameras will make the call on you pretty soon.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, the last thing I was going to say on that, which I forgot before, but it's a good segue there, is, what I thought was interesting about this. If you read the details and the company that's behind this, and at least in Paris, he's basically saying that there are no automatic decision making. It's just identify and escalate, and it raises the attention of an operator so they can make the decision and decide what, so, somebody fell. Did they just trip? Or were they assaulted, right? And they can make a choice of, do I have to send an officer? Do I have to send a SWAT team? Do I let it go? So I think that human in the loop thing, as we say in the industry, is there, at least in this case. But you're right. At some point, certainly the goal would be less people or no people making those decisions, right?
At that point, going into Heathrow, what I found really interesting is you go into Heathrow and it's completely automated customs check, immigration check. Right. So there are no people. You walk up to a little station, you scan the passport, it looks into you, takes your image, whatever it is, and then you're allowed into the country. Back into the US, right? If you don't have global entry, you got a 1 hour wait at JFK because there are people. So my other thing was, what is the difference? Why do the Brits feel it's okay? Or what do they have that allows them to let machines make the decision about whether a person gets into the country or not, that we don't have? Is it that we just, CPP makes the choice not to use that technology? Is it flawed in some way? If it's flawed, then why are the Brits okay with it, right? Yeah. I found that kind of really interesting, that they're at a stage where they seem to trust technology, which makes decisions on foreigners coming into the country. And they have obviously some lanes I think are like it's Canada, US, certain places that use a machine. So why don't we have, if you're a U.S. citizen and you're coming into the country, like, why doesn't everybody have global entry, right?
Well, I'll give you another layer on that. So years ago, when I was, in London 3-4 times a year for our events there, our chapters and things there, before they had that, Delta had that.
Well, so
I would get on a plane in New York and they wouldn't even look at my boarding pass. They just take a picture of me and pull up my passport, pull up my information, whatever the flight is, 5.5 hours before I arrive in London. Then I get to London and they don't have any of that information. So talk about the privacy people, like, okay, I get the concerns or whatever. And I think a lot of the immigration now is an opt out. If you want to opt out and do the manual line, you can do that. But if my privacy, if Delta already has my information, then why not pass that on to another agency, right? It's already out there. And this is where I think the friction is of, to me, if I am going to give up some privacy, which I think you do with all these things now, Delta, whatever, all these groups, whatever, at least give me the benefit. To me, the privacy, the balancing act is the privacy and the convenience, right? For a long time, it was like you're losing your privacy, but you're not getting any of the upside. So hopefully that's kind of starting to change.
Well, I think there's you've heard this phrase, security theater, right? And you wonder which of the two systems is the right one, right? Is the one that the UK has for some countries safe? If it's so, why don't we use it? Or is our model, which is you want somebody to look at everybody who's coming in and ask these questions like, where were you? What were you doing there? What does it matter? I tell you, I was buying shoes, whatever. And so
I always question that. And no disrespect to law enforcement. I'm sure there's some very good people in law enforcement that can look somebody in the eye and tell if they're, but I would say the vast majority of the people that come, through those things, they didn't catch me when I was smuggling cheese. They didn't, like whatever it was. So, I don't know. That's why I'm always like, if I'm going to err on the side of something, I'm going to err on the side of technology, because I think technology is going to get it more often right than a human will, just human nature. But
And like I said, final thought, maybe there is something in the question, right? I don't know. Maybe, like you said, maybe every so often the way somebody answers the question triggers something or raises an alert. I don't know, right?
But by the way, AI can do that, right? I mean, you have AI in contact centers now that can tell frustration, that can, right? So, if they're gonna route your call based on how frustrated you are, then why not talk? I'd be very happy to talk to an AI, and if they sense I'm nervous, then kick me over to a person, right? But at least that's the exception instead of the rule, and you get some conveniences. Anyway, let's get to our main topic. So, when we
so
well, I almost called today's show "What Happens When Big Tech Companies Fail," which probably would have been more appropriate after the CrowdStrike outage 2 weeks ago and the tech market crash last week. But the thought process was, you and I were talking about this several weeks ago. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I started doing some research and realizing how many of the big tech companies we use, and certainly enterprises use, are not even profitable. So at some point, okay, if Spotify goes out of business, which is one of them, by the way, who hasn't been profitable all these years, it's a inconvenience. But if a bigger one goes out, what happens, right? What happens to society? What happens to business? I mean, you saw what happens to business when something goes out a couple of weeks ago with CrowdStrike and Microsoft. So that was a seemingly like a an update issue, not a cyber issue, and not obviously someone pay the bills issue. But yeah, there's a lot of household. I was surprised, and I'm in the business. I was surprised in my research how many companies were not profitable.
Well, there's two things, right? The way accounting works is pretty antiquated. So the rules of accounting go back to Rockefeller, Standard Oil, right? DuPont, rubber bearing era, and so it was based on physical assets. So accounting rules handle real things relatively well. They don't handle intangibles well, right? And so there are lots of proposals about how to change that. But sometimes it looks like a loss because simply it's just the way accounting treats intangible assets and investments in brand and a bunch of other things. Then there's the other one, which is the Amazon strategy, which you lose money forever because you're knocking everybody out of the market, and then eventually start making money. And so investors will put up with, they'll continue to feed you cash because you're losing money to scale, right? And that is an approved way of growing a business in the tech world. So, and then there are we're losing money just because we're not good or our product isn't good and things are not. There's no strategic reason for losing money. Amazon made the case that there is a strategy in which you quote unquote have losses for a long time because you're scaling the platform, developing the business, and so on. So there are different kinds of losing money, right? Is what we see today.
So let's tackle the financial one for the markets one, because it's so recent. Because I want to get to the Amazon model, yeah. But you look at I know it's bounced back a little bit over the last 24 hours, but tech ETFs were like a big chunk. They were down like 60%, and they're talking about these a lot of these ETFs that have gotten people into the market now are kind of maybe killing the stock market, right? And this was as of Monday morning, so this is you probably have better up-to-date information, Carlos. But as of Monday morning, I'm talking about $1 trillion just wiped out of the market. So if those companies for whatever reason can't withstand that dip, what happens?
Well, again, we go from where are we though, right? We're at a historic high. I mean, of all time. The market SPY was at 550 or so. I think it was a week or so ago. So, yeah, it's down. But why did we get here? We got here because a year ago, NVIDIA said the future is AI, and the market went crazy over AI. So maybe somebody might say, well, just correct. And then even the correction, right? We're still up a huge amount or where we were pre the NVIDIA earthquake, right? The AI movement. So the sense is always as long as the train continues to roll, right, the money will continue to come in. The moment anybody senses that, well, maybe it's over, nobody wants to be the last person out. So I think that's what you're seeing. But it's back up a little bit today. SPY's up, S&P's up again a little bit today, 4 or 5%. So my sense is also there was some sense of the whole Biden right before I left, right, of the Biden poll, and nobody likes uncertainty, and so what happens now is probably there as well. But I did get the sense that it was a little bit of the wind coming out of the AI sales.
Yeah, no, so I agree with you from a market investor standpoint. I'm more thinking about, though, like what happens to the end users of the technology companies that are hit by this, or and the employees. I mean, these things tend to breed changes in strategy, changes in partnerships and vendors, layoffs, right? So what are the bigger ramifications of a company that, something like this happens, or to your point, there's just a whole bunch of overinflated companies. I mean, one of the articles I read was talking about, to your point about, is it just an accounting thing? It was an article out of Harvard, the Harvard Business Review, basically saying that, some of the most valuable tech startups have never been profitable. They raise billions of dollars from investors and continue to lose money every year.
Yeah, and that was the article that talked about the way in which accounting works. But like, at the end of the day, it's valuation, right? For a lot of these firms. So if the value continues to go up, investors are happy no matter what's happening to their, when eventually the company IPOs, they get whatever it is that they're looking for out of the entire transaction. So I think that the question about layoffs is an interesting one, because as we know, let's go back to Piketty's book Capital, right, where he made this really interesting distinction between, labor and management, right? And so we know how the tech world works. There are people who, it doesn't really matter what the market does, right? Because of their skills and talent and what they know, they're going to be safe, whether they're in a corporate job or not in a corporate job. And then there are people who are on the margins who are going to come and go depending on how the company does and how the market is going. So which is the majority, right? It's going to impact them. It doesn't impact the star coders or the programmers, the people who are really running these farms. At least that's my impression over the years, has been that there is the group that's protected, right? And they don't really worry about these things because they're always going to be in high demand. Then the people who are more on the margin, or whose skill sets, especially in tech, as you know better than I do, right? How long does the skill set last in the tech sector? Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe.
if you would have asked me, if you would have said that to me 6 months ago, I wouldn't have even hesitated. I would have agreed with you 100%. I'm seeing a lot of very senior executives at Fortune 500 companies that I thought were untouchable looking for work now.
Yeah, but that's different, because in the C-suite, as you get close to that, things reverse, right? I want to say, 50, I think we measured the typical C-suite tenure was about 2.5 years. Right? Unless you were a CISO or a CIO, which was less than 2 years. So there was a joke there that the closer you are to C-suite, the closer you are to being out of a job. So because a lot of times it's a terminal role, right? But also because it's people tend not to last in those roles. So you're right about that. The closer you get to that EVP C-suite sort of role, the more volatile, right, the career path becomes. That's just the nature of those kinds of jobs. Because what I saw working with that kind of person is that you typically don't get fired for content, right? You don't get fired because you don't get fired as CIO because you don't know technology. I mean, it doesn't typically happen that way. It tends to be, as I always said, chemistry. You don't get, something happens and either you and the CEO don't get along anymore, or the peers and you don't work out, or a story, right? I saw it again and again where the business changes, the board or your CEO, whoever, asks for, what is your story on AI? Where is your story on EVs? What is your story on whatever? And the story you tell doesn't work. And you're done.
So is your feeling that this is not a risk because these companies, it's just accounting and these companies won't actually ever fail? Or like, what do you...
If we think about what was the last big tech failure?
Well, I guess financial. I was gonna say CrowdStrike, but we're talking more financial.
No, I mean, like, what was the last big tech company that went broke? That you can think of?
Yeah, I guess the more realistic path is they get acquired.
They get acquired.
Undervalued. I mean, you look at the retail industry, all those traditional not all, but a good chunk of those traditional retail brands have been acquired for pennies on the dollar, but still, but that was kind of my point. Like, if a retailer goes out, okay, some consumers are unhappy, but if Uber, Lyft, Spotify maybe not.
These companies have a certain level of infrastructure that's been built, right? And so what happens is that if the business model becomes obsolete or not as aligned to the market, the infrastructure, if it's worthwhile, it still has value. This is why they're taken over for the most part, distinct from, let's say, a Wright or a mall or something like that, right? Where the value is just the building at this point. So
yeah, real estate.
Tech companies, most of the time, right, after a certain scale, you've got a user base, you've got an install base, you've got platforms, and if the executive team doesn't do such a good job keeping the company aligned, but those assets are so typically worth something, right? Like you said, to your point, most of the time, what happens is you get sold.
So I guess I hear you. So I guess the question more is around,
like, tech is super illogical.
What business models maybe change, right? If you have an entire industry, so let's play out the Tesla, sorry, not the Tesla one, the Uber and Lyft, which as of the stuff I saw was still not making money, right? And that includes, by the way, traditional Uber Eats, right? So you've displaced an entire industry, right? There's like taxi commissions that are gone because of the the changes in the marketplace or whatever. If at some point they say, hey, this business model just doesn't work, I still have interesting conversations with people about the Uber Eats and the DoorDashes of the world, and it's like we were talking about before the show about industries becoming overcomplicated and having too many middlemen. At some point it's like, is the food industry just out of margin? I mean, it's a low margin business to begin with. Now you add a technology fee on, drivers want to get paid more money. At some point, does someone just say, hey, this model's broken, so yeah, maybe I'll buy the company for pennies on the dollar and save the customer list, but you're not going to be able to get an Uber. So you're traveling and you're not going to get a car. You're not going to get a taxi.
Well, up to now, though, the markets has been willing to pay for it, right? If you look at Uber Eats, the price goes up all the time, and
Crazy.
It seems to still be in business, right? They still, no matter what fees they throw on or whatever else they put out there, maybe the people we've underestimated how much people are willing to pay to have someone else complete a task. And I think that's the interesting part, is that the rise of that service economy, right, or those service platforms, because they're not really, I mean, they're tech right now, but they're not really tech at the end of the day, right? It's still a human being who gets in a car, goes to a restaurant, because you're too busy or you're too whatever to not do it yourself. And so what I find about them is they're interesting because they look like tech platforms, but they're really not, right? Instacart, right? Instacart, somebody goes shopping for you. The other day, somebody was a supermarket for you. Walk down the aisle, pull stuff off a shelf, put it into a bag, drove her all the way to your house. And so I guess you said that's just time, right? That you're willing to pay for. You said that's the 1 hour I didn't use going to Safeway or whatever, and that's maybe worth more than people think. I don't know, maybe not as much as the Ubers, Instacarts would want, but I find that really interesting. That it is really, it's like it is a servant economy. Like if you spend time in Latin America or some places like that, where most middle class and middle class people have servants, right? They have maids and people who go shopping for them. America is funny because we have the same thing. We just don't want to talk to people.
Yeah.
Like, think about how many people who live in a giant house, where if you were in Argentina, there'd be 5 people living there taking care of the house, full time, guaranteed. Right here, it's a gigantic house, and 7,000 square feet or whatever, and a crew comes in once a week to clean. Right.
So it's more fractional resource model.
This is so. If you added all that up, which you better off just hiring somebody who lived in the house, bought groceries for you, went and picked up your food, right? Did all the things that all these apps do. Americans are funny because we will slice the job up, right? Maybe from a psychological standpoint, Americans just historically aren't comfortable with servants in homes like they are in other countries. But we are perfectly fine with a layer of technology in between the serving person and us. Maybe it seems it's easier on the conscience if it goes through an app versus a person directly. I don't know.
Yeah. So, but my question is more, what happens when that service drops? Like, okay, a non-tech example. If my landscapers don't show up for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to cut my lawn. I don't own a lawnmower. I don't know how to get one. I don't know how to do it if I do get one.
Right, but eventually you would. This is the funny part, right? That if there was a movie that came out years ago. It was, what was it like? The Day Without Mexicans, right? It was a movie about California, where California wakes up and all the immigrants are gone. So people are like, wait a minute, I can't. Who's going to cut the lawn? Who's going to take my kid to school? Whatever, right? So people relearn the skills that they used to have, right?
But that has a big economic impact. If I live in a city or an urban area and don't purchase a car because I'm used to having Ubers, right? Then all of a sudden, if I don't have access to Uber, it changes things. And maybe you say, as a consumer, okay, you eventually just buy a car. But for businesses, what kind of revenue loss do you have now that service is gone?
But I think this is the interesting question of what tech does to us as people, right? I made the argument before that I challenge anyone to demonstrate a benefit that the iPhone has given to the human species, right? I can think of a lot of problems, things that it's harmed us, but I can't think of anything that we're better at because Steve Jobs invented the iPhone. And so, not a thing. And as I've asked this question since we had that conversation in the show, no one's been able to give me one. So,
no, but that's like, to me, that's like the phone book theory, right? So Einstein, doesn't know his own phone number because he can look it up, right? Why do we have computers if we can do or calculators for that matter? It's because you have you have a foundation of technology so that you can access things quicker, you can do things quicker, more efficiently, do deeper work instead of menial work, right?
Yeah, but are we doing that? No, I don't think that's the case. What do people use their phone for? Like doom scrolling? What is the great benefit that this device gave us, right? We used to be able to read a map. Now we can't read a map. It took away all these skills. It hasn't given us any in return.
I disagree. I travel a lot more now because it's a lot more convenient than it was 20 years ago.
I get that part. I don't mean that. I don't mean there aren't convenience. I mean, as a species, as an organism, right? Evolutionarily speaking, what have we gotten better at because of this device? And the answer is nothing. We have gotten worse at many things that might be useful for survival one day, right?
I think that's a transitional thing, right? That's like saying, the telephone wasn't good because, you had to pay for long distance. I think we're in a transitional period where, yes, we're using a lot. There is certainly innovation for the sake of innovation right now. But at some point, the idea is that we don't have, I don't have to spend 3.5 hours planning a 3.5 hour trip, mapping it out. I can spend that 3.5 hours with my kids. I can spend that 3.5 hours, making something or learning something or being a more intellectual human.
But I don't buy
instead of mapping out manually.
I don't buy that because it reminds me of when outsourcing first came along. And I remember I was in India one time and I was talking to some people who were doing jobs that had been done at John Deere, right? And I said, what do you think happened to the people who at John Deere whose job you're doing now, right? And the folks in India said, oh, I'm sure they got a much better job. Or they're home painting or sculpting, whatever. I said, no, they're not. They're unemployed, or they got a job that pays 2/3 of what they used to make at Deere. That's what happened. You can have a fantasy that these folks in the Midwest are now painting or sculpting or whatever, but that isn't the reality for most of them. And I think this is the same fantasy with technology. You think, okay, wow, I've just saved 3 hours. Let me go read James Joyce right? Or contemplate Marcus Aurelius. No, they're doom scrolling, right? They're staring at YouTube.
Yeah, but that's not that's one example. There's other examples. You know, we've cited this one in the automation industry for 10 years, right? That, you know, the ATMs, when ATMs first came out, everybody was concerned it was going to decrease the amount of tellers. And in fact, what it did was it decreased the number of tellers per bank branch, but it tripled the number of bank branches that they could have, because they wanted to. And that's why you see, you know, my town, I've got, maybe you don't need this, but you got 3 chases within like a 10 block radius, because they've acquired and multiplied. They want to be physically visible wherever you're going. And they're able to do that because they can, you know, have the same amount of tellers, but spread them across 3 banks.
Do you think high tech makes us dumber as a species?
It can, right? If people use a calculator, right, to spend the time doing stupid things, right, then yes. But there are also people that, you know, are not doing hand done arithmetic, and they're doing more sophisticated things with that, right? If I'm doing my budgets or my planning, and I don't have to manually calculate everything that Google Docs calculates for me, it allows me to spend that time doing higher value stuff. Sure.
I just get a sense that as a society, right, as a population, we haven't traded. We haven't. If big tech over the last 30 years gave us a bunch of time, I don't think we've used it very well.
But that's not technology's fault. That's humanity's fault. That's a bigger conversation for another.
I think we wasted. If there was a technology, what would you call it? Windfall, right?
Well, you have all these people, right? You have these people that work 70 hours a week their whole lives. They are forced into retirement and they die 3 months later, right? Because there's no balance to their life. That's all they are, and that's all they are built on. So yeah, that's a mental health issue. It's like, I mean, you're getting
exercise to go back and say, since the arrival of the internet, how many hours can you calculate that tech has given you personally, you, right? Let's just say that if we say that it's
but it's like automation. It's the same debate we have in automation, right? Do you reinvest those hours in more work? Do you reinvest those hours in more efficiency? You know, that's
let's take a typical person. I want to make it personal. Just say, let's a person, and you say that person, since the web was invented, the average person was given 1 month a year. When we add up all the hours, the stuff you don't do, you're not folding maps, you're not doing this, you're not doing that.
Technology is definitely impacted, right? I mean, the fact that I run a business I run a global network of 130,000 members from my house, and can see my kids in between meetings. Absolutely.
That's all good. My point is a little different. My point is big tech gave this person, this mythical person, 1 month a year. Let's say, now let's multiply that month by 30 years. Okay. So let's just say that you've gotten somewhere between 3 and 4 years of free time. Yeah. Okay. So beautiful. Thank you, Silicon Valley. You gave each American 3 years. Let's just smooth it out, right? What did we do with those 3 years?
That's a philosophical question. That's not a technology question. That's a philosophical question. Half the people will do drugs and terrible things and try to take over the world, do a Pinky in the Brain routine, for those of you old enough to remember that show. And the other half might invent the answer to cancer. You know, if you don't have to work, right, as many hours, and you reinvest that time into research. I mean, you have family in medical research. They invest that time in medical research. They don't have to worry about bills, and their digital twin is paying their bills and taking care of their responsibilities.
Anyway, people were doing research before the internet. My question is, to the average person who was gifted this time windfall of, let's say it's 3.5 years. What did they do with that 3.5 years?
I think there's a lot of people that would, if they, I mean, that's like saying, well, we shouldn't have, you know, there's a whole bunch of social issues packed in that. But, you know, the whole idea, I think that you agree politically, even that, you know, if certain people were freed up to not have to work, they would be doing more positive things with their time.
My take is, if we had taken collectively those 3.5 years and made ourselves smarter in something, right? We had learned new skills. We had acquired new capabilities as a society. We had become better at things. I think the opposite happened. I think we got worse, right? We lost the skills that we used to have, like, memory in some cases, or attention span, a bunch of other things. But then the time that we were given by tech wasn't really put to productive use. It was kind of squandered. So it was a loss on both ends. We lost the skills that tech took away that we don't need to use anymore, right? Like reading and math, for example, which can be pretty handy. And the time that we get in return for not having to learn how to read a map, here's a month. I used that month looking at cat videos.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think that's transitional and temporary, because what it hasn't done is it's affected me to the extent that I can spend more time with my kids. It hasn't affected me to the point where I can quit my job and go travel the world 51 weeks out of the year, right? So I think we're in a transitional period where there's companies that are making money by trying to solicit that extra time and put it to waste, but there are there's opportunity, I guess is the way I would say. Maybe I'm more hopeful and optimistic than you are, but
I don't know the answer. It's a question I'm posing. It could be that I'm wrong. It could be that somebody will go, well, no, on net, people took that time, right? The big tech windfall, and we do all kinds of really great things with it for the most part. I don't know the answer. It's just a question I ask myself sometimes.
Yeah, I mean that's a good philosophy question or sociology question of if you gave people a whole bunch more time, would they use it for good or evil? I don't know, but I think there's definitely potential for good. What I'm really concerned about is if they turn off Alexa, my house is gonna stop working. I'm not gonna be able to turn on a light or music or lock my doors because they're losing billions of dollars on Alexa, and that might be the next one. And that may be hey, maybe it's not a company. Maybe Amazon doesn't go out of business, but if they stop doing overnight delivery and turn off my Alexa, it's going to disrupt my life.
But it's funny how we get to the point where you go, oh my God, we used to have to go look for something right for 2 weeks and drive around town to find now if it doesn't show up the next day. Somehow it's a crisis, right?
It is though, because technology is giving me more time. If technology takes that time back, then I'm in trouble.
Right, there you go.
Good conversation, my friend. Good conversation. Well, lots. It's interesting. I just thought, like I said, if all of a sudden, and you're making a bigger, broader point of, is all this stuff good? My point is more just, whether it's good or not, it's here. We're reliant on it as a society.
Right.
Maybe you're not, but the majority of people are. The majority of businesses are. I mean, you look at what happened with with CrowdStrike. I mean, one company basically damage the entire world for depending on what days, hours, days, weeks. The medical field, the travel field. I mean, took us to it, and that wasn't even a cyber attack. It wasn't on purpose. It wasn't calculated or orchestrated. It was just an accident. What happens when it is calculated, right?
I think that's the thing that as a final thought, I don't know the answer to. This would be something for a really hardcore infrastructure expert, right? How vulnerable are we? We look around at our society and you see traffic lights working, right? Hospitals working. You go, well, how fragile is that? And I remember reading an interview with Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who wrote Black Swan, and he made this interesting point. He said, when I as a futurist, he goes, most people think about the future in an additive way. He said that means that they add things to the present, a flying car, for example, right? Or teleportation. I do it the other way. I take things away. I look at what's fragile that could disappear tomorrow, right? That no longer would be needed. And I think about the future sort of that way. And I think that's the interesting question here is like, when we look around in our world, everything looks solid to us, right? But is it? And I think these moments like the CrowdStrike, at least for me, what it makes me think of is Taleb's concept of fragility. Right? How much of the world, which seems at any given moment to be solid, right, or stable, or entrenched, it's just on the surface. Then something come along, whether it's a computer virus, or as we saw with with COVID, right? That was a really interesting example because that was actually a biological virus, right? And you saw how there were months where it seemed like society was on the verge of like cracking up, people fighting in supermarkets over toilet paper, whatever. And you go, well, then it's pretty fragile what we have, right? If the fear of COVID was enough to have people fighting out at Safeway, and you go, had it been a little bit worse, suddenly the people who worry about these sort of doomsday scenarios start to make a lot more sense. And you go, the world is a lot more fragile than it seems to be. And that would be an interesting conversation to have at some point, which is when we look around at all these things that look so stable, right? Like airports and power and the internet itself, how stable is it?
Yeah.
What is the fragility index of the infrastructure that supports us, right, and enables modern life? Because it isn't bridges and roads. You can kind of get a sense of whether a bridge or a road is more or less intact. When you look at your Wi-Fi router, you have no idea. It could be two clicks away from disappearing, or maybe it's fine. So,
well, and I said this to you before we went on live. Like, to me, it's like, okay, maybe the government going after Google search monopoly will create some more innovation. But, if I'm a regulator and I'm understaffed and under budget, you should be looking at this. I mean, how does one company with one person, maybe maybe it is this point of view in the fast companies, we're over automated, which goes against everything we practice and preach here all the time. Are we over automated? But the issue is not so much the automation, but the safeguards and the checks and the redundancy, and how does seemingly one person's error shut down the world? That's what, to me, regulators should be focused on and examining right now.
That's a topic for a future show, I think, Dan. Just bring somebody in who does have a sense of how this
beat up on a regulator. No, I've done that before.
I think the question is the fragility index of our world.
Yeah. Like, is there a doomsday? You have those doomsday clocks, nuclear clocks. Is there like a tech one? Like, how close are we from the next CrowdStrike thing? Not lasting days, but lasting years.
Platforms, they should have kind of score, right, to say when you this is the fragility index of a platform. It will give us a sense of, well, this is really rock solid. Or as we saw with CrowdStrike, we know the airlines, it seems on a regular basis, and we have once a year something happens. They don't seem that robust to me, right? Because
to all those people, and I know I've got a lot of them on our network. All these people that manage risk.
Yeah.
At companies, like, how does this fall through the cracks?
With its people, right? Mm-hmm.
There you go.
All right,
Carlos.
Dan.
Good to see you as always, buddy. Thank you.
I'll see you next week as always.
See you next week. Week after, actually, 2 weeks. We'll be back Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, check out irpaai.com for more resources or to schedule a briefing with one of our subject matter experts. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care, Dan. See you next time. Bye-bye.